Again, we want to thank Paul Bishop for announcing the horse part of our parade. He does a great job. Great singer. Been a good volunteer here in the horse area, helped coordinate everything. Again, you can see the band getting all their equipment put away. We've got a very good band and music program here in Mount Pleasant. The entire program is very engaged. They do a very good job. As you can see, they got a tremendous amount of equipment. They will compete throughout the fall here at some different programs. And then, of course, they do perform at every home football game. And then, of course, when the winter comes, the pep band will perform at the basketball games. But the Mount Pleasant Community Schools should be very proud of the band and the music department we have. They've got a tremendous amount of talent, and we sure appreciate them coming out today and performing for us here. So we're about ready to get started here with Calvalcade of Power. We appreciate the horses going first, and now we're going to start with the cars and tractors and then the steam engines.
First automobile through is Marvin Johansson, and he's driving a 1923 Model T. He's right here from Muscatine, Mount Pleasant, wherever.
This next tractor belongs to Dwight Manicopa of Fairfield, Iowa. It's a feature tractor for 2014. Jason is operating it, and he did a lot of the work on that tractor and did a great job.
John Cruikshank out of Burlington driving a 1930 Model A panel truck by the Sater family, Mount Pleasant.
1938 Oliver, Model 70, owned by Jacob Copeland from Pella, Iowa, and Eric is the operator. Is the driver.
This next one's out of Johnson County. It's a 1931 Model A, Troy and Susan Rue family.
1958 Oliver, 770 military, owned by Kenny Grimm of Goose Lake, Iowa. Kenny's the operator.
Harold and Rosemary Jacobs out of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, in the very first Model A, a 1928.
1942 Oliver, number 60 Standard, owned by Anna Kepper from Ankeny, Iowa.
Gil Bristol out of Rockfall, Illinois, in a 1911 International. He has Miss Violet from the Long Branch over there.
1953 Oliver 66, owned and operated by Keith Grimm of Goose Lake, Iowa.
Jim Shellady out of Nevada, Iowa, in a 1917 Dodge.
1958 Oliver Super 66, owned by Kenny Grimm of Goose Lake, Minnesota, Iowa, and Kenny's the operator.
1925 Model T truck from Ron and Linda Magnuson from Good Hope, Illinois.
1927 Harpar 1224, owned by Fred Buckert of Hamilton, Illinois, and Jeremy is the operator.
John Daly in a 1920 center door Model T. How come they call it a center door? Maybe that's why.
1948 Oliver 60, owned by Wendell Schellenberger from Pleasant Hill, Iowa, and Wendell is the operator.
This is a 1925 racer, Gary and Mary Lowry from Washington, Iowa, called Hey Hiram. It's a 1932 Illinois state champion.
1960 Oliver 880, owned by the Bush family of Madrid, Iowa. Bookie.
Don and Kathy Jones driving a 1937 Packard Business Coupe from Keokuk, Iowa.
This next one's a 1947 Oliver Standard, owned and operated by Ray Budenhoff.
Lloyd Bank from Salem, Iowa, a 1918 Model T.
Take that, too.
1961 Road Crop 660, owned by Ray Budenhoff.
A 1927 Model T truck from Brett Gruen, Taylor Ridge, Illinois, and a Sweet 16, Sidney Taylor from Mount Pleasant.
1929 Hart Car 1224H, owned by Eddie Ward of Bay City, Missouri, and Eddie's the operator.
1927, the very first year that Model T was made, Curtis Walpole from Solon, Iowa. The very last year for the Model T.
1948 Oliver 70, owned and operated by Bryce Mitchell of Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Bill Brickey from 1929 from Mount Pleasant, and their grandchildren from Virginia.
1945 Oliver 60, owned by Paul Martin of Marion, Iowa, and Paul's the operator.
Gary Seib from Donaldson, Iowa, and a 1913 Buick.
We have no parade card for 021.
Mr. and Mrs. Warren Schultz out of Burlington, Iowa, in their Packard. This happens to be a 1941.
1937 Oliver Hart Car 70, owned by Roy and Sharon Bowers of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Ray and Sharon is the operators.
Major Watkins and his daughter from Yarmouth, Iowa. Major, 98 years old, from Yarmouth, Iowa. He has never missed an Old Thrashers parade ever. The reason he's riding is because his car is a feature car. 98.
1957 Oliver Super 77, owned and operated by Randy Coleman of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
This is a Heisey family, the Steve Heisey family out of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, in their 1921 Model T. Good job.
1955 Oliver Super 55, owned by Randy Mullins of Mount Union, Iowa, and Randy's the operator.
1932 Chevrolet, Don and Marie Nevins out of Wayland, Iowa. You can always tell a 32 by the hood on the front. There's only one year that was louvered.
1955 Oliver 770, owned and operated by Walter Mullen of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
This is a 1927 Hudson, Bill Hudson out of Walcott. 37, Bill Hudson driving a Hudson.
1952 Oliver 77, owned by Walter Mullins of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Walter is the operator.
1917 Ford Speedster from Blake and Brian Smith out of Mediapolis, Iowa.
1962 Oliver 1900, owned and operated by Gary Spitznagel of Wapello. This also has a front wheel assist.
Ron Fortune out of Yarmouth, Iowa, in a 1926 Model T.
59. This is the Cockchuck 1900, owned by John Heyer from the state of New York. Comes all down here every year.
Harry and Alice Daw out of Troy, Missouri, in a 1896 quadricycle, the very first one made. It's a duplication. Rush and Long electric car. It's 1916 from the Bob Gertis family.
1968 Oliver 2050, owned and operated by Frederick Hare of Lawton's.
Danny Peterson out of Olds in his brush. 1910.
1946 Oliver 70, owned by James and Reagan Anderson from Atlanta, Iowa, and Chris Anderson is the operator.
Jim Daw in a 1913 Model T Ford Speedster from Montrose, Iowa.
In 1946, Oliver 70. No, that's not. No, 75. 1952, Cockshot 40, owned and operated by Ken and Marlene Perkins of Bennett, Iowa, pulling a Model 15 Sycamore.
Dick Sabosky out of Brighton, Iowa in his beautiful 1930 Model A.
There we go, friend Chuck Pelly. 1939 Hot Bar, Cockshot 90, owned by Chuck and Nan Pelly of Wheatland, Iowa.
1931 Model A, Mike Meinert from Walford, Iowa.
1968 Oliver 1750, owned and operated by Roger Roth of Washington, Iowa.
We got a 1941 Dodge from Sonny Melders out of Fairfield, Iowa. Nice truck.
1928 Oliver Hartford, 1836, owned by the Midwest Old Thrasher, driven by Ron Wright of West Burlington, Iowa.
1929 Model A Ford Ron and Lorraine Herring out of Winchester, Kansas.
1952 Cockshot, Blackhawk number 30, owned and operated by Philip Smith of Lawrence with a Cockshot 311 Hayrack.
Art Ham from Mount Pleasant in his 56 Ford.
1959 Oliver 70 row crop, Robert Swansburg from Pearl, Iowa. Got a road grader built in Jamesville, Iowa.
Mike Parker from Libertyville, Iowa in a 1931 Model A.
1938 Oliver 80 row crop, owned and operated by Melvin Gipple of Crawfordsville, Iowa.
Wayne and Miriam Terpstra in Holland, Michigan in a 1930 Model A.
Okay, what two?
Two of my boys from wherever in a 1930 Studebaker Duplex Phaeton.
That's a 66.
What? 1949 Oliver 66, owned by Metro Rovendale from Winfield, Iowa, and Billy Edgar's the operator.
Chuck Carbach from Weaver, Iowa. There again, I mentioned the 32 Chevrolet. Nice car.
1950 Oliver 77, owned by Floyd Schaefer of Fairfield, Iowa. Gail Schaefer is the operator.
Dale Preeb from Cahokia, Missouri in a 1927 Model T.
It's Oliver 1650 here in front. We don't have a card on it.
How you doing?
Nice tractor.
1940 Chevrolet from Jim Flinspaw out of Fairfield, Iowa.
I got one. 1942 Oliver 60, owned and operated by Gary Colonel of Collins, Iowa.
1923 Model T from Bob Hessler from Danville, Iowa.
1967 Oliver 1950 Teen, owned by Bob Kirby from Dubuque, Iowa, and Bob is the operator.
Here's a one from Springfield, Iowa. It's a 28 Model A from the Johnson family.
You've already done that one. I'll do 113. No 113. There's no parade card for this little Oliver 88 or 77? 88.
1931 Model A from the Aukenfells in Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1950 Oliver 77 row crop, owned by Adam Stockwell from Festus, Missouri. Adam's the operator.
51 Studebaker from the Greenhurst Farm, the Graver family here in Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
This next tractor is
How you doing, Danny?
a featured garden tractor. It's a 105 Oliver.
1929.
Kenny Graham is the operator.
From Phil Graber here out of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
That was 181. 1938, Alice Chalmer, Model B, pulling a little 40-inch combine. David Matthews of Danville, Iowa.
Here's the 29 Model A from Harold Rebling family, and his grandkids are from California, the very first one.
1948 B.A. Fabry, A, owned and operated by Dennis Schenck of West Burlington, Iowa, pulling a 1947 two-row case Picker Scheller. He's from Carmen, Illinois.
Roger Graber in a very nice 1958 Chevrolet Biscayne from Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
This is the nice oil pull here at the 1929 runway. Oil pull 4060, owned by Danny Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Danny's the operator.
1930 Model A from the Sater family here in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Brad Kesey in his 1923 Nash, the old whiskey runner. They're from Lansing, Michigan. In the back seat is racks to hold moonshine.
Avery, 2550, owned by Marvin Stokel of Tama, Iowa. Kim Pond is the operator.
1967 Dodge straight truck, George and Janicke, Washington, Iowa. Janicek.
1918 runway oil pull 1630, owned by Leonard Harvey from Reaganville, and owned in the notes is Brian Wilson and Jeff Root is the operators. Let's see, it was Ken Ben. Yeah.
No 217. Go ahead,
Jared. This is 2040 owned by Kenny and Danny Bucket of Hamilton, Illinois, and driven by Jared Bucket and his girlfriend.
1923 Rumley, oil pull model 2040, owned and operated by Dan Buckert. Yep, Dan and Ken Buckert.
This is a half-scale 65 horsepower case built in 1978, owned by Dale Bohr of Toddville, operated by Dale, restored by the Bohr family. Next one's a half-scale Advance, Rumley built in 1983, owned by Lester Butterfield of Toddville, Iowa, operated by Kevin, restored by the brothers, Kevin and Lester.
23, no number. I don't know, it ain't Bob. 223, we don't have a card on it. Nice little John Deere cat crawler.
A 1913 16 horsepower Russell owned by Dennis and Deb Walker of Burlington, operated by Dennis and Paul French.
We don't have one.
Who is that? Any idea?
No.
I don't know. Just add to it. No parade card for the little Caterpillar Diesel, but it's a nice little unit. '17 60 horsepower case owned by
John and Darlene Deck of Wichita, Kansas, operated by the same.
1932 Monarch, owned and operated by Bob Lafever of Peach Bottom, Pennsylvania. Bob is a fender bender.
I got it. You got it. John Hill. 1930 Huber, 3245, owned and operated by John Hill of Wayland, Iowa.
I think that Nickel Shepherd over there is running out of steam or something. Ah, much better. This is a 20 horsepower nickel Shepherd owned by Old Thrashers, operated by Dale Full of Abington, Illinois, the Bug and Joyce Hoffmaster of Dayton, Ohio.
This is 1919 Twin City 1220, owned by Mike Swansburg from Des Moines, Iowa, and Mike is the operator.
33, 34. Okay. 1951 Wards HG, owned and operated by Robert Swanberg of Pearl, Iowa.
1936 John Deere Model A, owned by Randy Kessler of Danville, Iowa, and Randy is the operator.
This is 1916 20 horsepower Woods Brothers, owned by Frank and Annie Pope of Albee, Iowa, operated by Frank.
What are we on? 235. 235.
1944 John Deere B, owned and operated by Stephen Hubble of Muscatine, Iowa.
1947 John Deere Model A, owned by David Fritz from Burlington, Iowa, and David Fritz is the operator.
This is a 5/8 scale Wood Brothers 22 horse, built by Tom Nichols and John Shepard of the Tumwa area, operated by Tom and Kim Nichols.
1941 Formula H, owned and operated by Nathan Fritz of Burlington, Iowa. And they just got married. I see the little flag there on the front.
1963 M&M Jetstar 2, owned by Jesse and Connie Gooden from Bloomfield, Iowa, and Jesse is the operator.
Just say what it is.
A 1912 20 horsepower Woods Brothers, owned by Mel and Judy Kerr of McComb, Illinois, operated by the Berkey family and the Wonder Dog.
1920 1020.
The John Deere B here, we don't have it. This is an original one. Probably just came off of the farm.
Could be in here, so I don't.
This is Old Thrashers 2014 Engine of the Year. It's a 1911 18 horsepower Woods Brothers, owned by Bob and Penny, or Penny and Bob, depends on who you talk to, of Whittier, Iowa, operated by Bob and Penny, and restored by John Johnson, Matt Berkey, Bob, and it's restored in the memory of Lennis Moore, who passed away this summer.
1919 International Harvester 1020, owned by Dora Brotherson of Tipton, Iowa.
1944 Formula H, got to put another wagon. Sarah Anderson, Dustin Anderson is the driver from West Branch, Iowa.
I got it.
1913 Avery 4080, owned and operated by Marvin Stokel of Tama, Iowa.
$1919 20 horsepower advance, also owned by Bob Gilchrist of Whittier, Iowa, operated by Aaron Lloyd, and it was bought last year from Texas and south of Houston. And the previous owner, Bob McDonald, is in a Testament someplace in here.
1955 John Deere 50, owned by Cully Bromwell of New London, Iowa, and Marlene Reed is the operator.
1952 John Deere AR, owned and operated by Joe Lonsbury of New London, Iowa.
1937 John Deere A, owned by Grant Lounsbury from New London, Iowa, and Grant is the operator.
274, and then the next one would be the D. It would be 275 would be the next one.
A 1914 40 horsepower case, also owned by Bob Gilchrist of Whittier, operated by Mike Ebert.
1952 John Deere G, owned by Larry Derbyshire of Yarmouth, Iowa. Pam Massner is the operator.
1935 John Deere Model D, owned by Jordan Steffen from Yarmouth, Iowa, and Larry Derbyshire is the operator.
A 1920s 1965 Port Huron, owned by Bob and Benny Gilchrist, operated by Wyatt Llewellyn of Perry, Missouri. Also, this is a simple compound. It can be put in a simple mode, and that's unusual for compounds.
1935 John Deere B, owned by the Helpry family of Winfield, Iowa. Wendell and Madden Black are the operators, assisted by their great-grandson.
1936 John Deere A, owned by Kathy Helpry from Winfield, Iowa, and Helpry family are the owners.
A 1965 Port Huron, Rob Nelson, Lockridge, Iowa. Also Richard Burrows, the owner. It's operated by Jacob Nelson and restored by Rob.
1950 John Deere 290 corn planter, owned and operated by Clinton Garrett of Wayland, Iowa.
1954 John Deere 60, owned by Curtis Helpry from owned by Curtis and Kathy Helpry of Winfield, Iowa.
1892 Minnesota Giant, owned by Mike Parker, Libertyville, Iowa. Operated by John Peterson and Mike Parker, restored by Mike. You see the little seat on the front? Used to be against the law if you didn't have a horse on it.
How you doing, Dean? Take your hat off and wave.
1942 KFSC, owned by Deanna Conley from Morning Sun, Iowa, and Deanna is the operator.
A 1909 K75 horse, owned by Bob Gertis of Burlington, Iowa, operated by Jeff Johnson.
1939 John Deere B, owned by Larry and Shirley Beckford of Wapello, Iowa. Larry Jr. is the operator.
1940 John Deere Model B, owned by Larry Bickford from Senior from Wapello, Iowa, and Larry and Shirley Bickford is the operator.
A 1917 40 horsepower case owned by Ron, Joe, and Dave Galbraith, Raleigh, Illinois. How's that? Operated by Ron and Betsy Galbraith, with Dave on the back.
1953 Family Super C, owned and operated by Lawn Warrior family of Morning Sun, Iowa.
A 1909 9-horse case owned by Joe Galbraith of Sterling, Illinois, operated and restored by the same.
There's the 560 here in front, painted up nice. We don't have a card on it.
This is a half-scale Rumbly built in 1964, owned by Tooney Melcher of Cedar Rapids, operated by granddaughter Sarah Melcher, restored by Tooney.
1929 Massey Harris Wallace 2030, owned and operated by Kenneth McKinley of Morning Sun, Iowa.
Gary Giro from Conesville. 37A.
37A in Conesville, Iowa.
This next one's a 1936B, owned by Jerry and Marlene Garrett of Giro.
'17 Wood Brothers, owned by Tooney Melcher of Cedar Rapids, operated by Clint Madison and Logan Heaton of Donaldson, restored by Tooney.
1936 Alice Chalmers WC, owned and operated by the Heffrey family of Wayland, Iowa.
1928 Caterpillar, owned by Midwest Old Thrashers. Nathan Graver is the operator in Crawfordsville.
307.
1936 Alice Chalmers WC, owned and operated by Roger Graver of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
Go ahead, DC.
1922 75 horsepower case, owned by Dick Campbell and Chris Hayler of Grand Mound, Iowa, operated by Chris Horn and Dick.
1934 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by Jason Greber from West Burlington, and Jason is the operator.
1951 Ford 8N, owned and operated by Courtney Bates of Washington, Iowa.
Formal Cubs, all I know. You here.
Here's the little formal Cub. We don't have a number on that yet.
In 1959 John Deere 630, owned and operated by Gary Johnson of Winsfield, Iowa.
1959 John Deere 730, owned by Bob Johnson of Winfield, Iowa, and Gary Johnson is the operator.
Oh, screwed that up. 328 Roberts.
Must have low boiler pressure.
1931 Rumley Model 6, owned by Merlin and Joyce Scarf of Anita, Iowa.
1915 60 horsepower case, owned by Huffy Ironworks, Mount Pleasant, operated by Whitney and Mike Stapp.
The next is 1956 case 400 high crop LP, owned by the Booker Firm, the Hamilton, Illinois, and one at 33 built.
A 1912 32-132 Canadian Special Reeves, owned by Midwest Old Thrashers, Mount Pleasant, operated by Fuzzy, Pup, Logan, Mike, and Drew.
John Deere 1010, owned by Buckert Farms of Hamilton, Illinois. Austin Buckert is the operator.
$1939 Farm OA, owned by Pat Mitchell from Warsaw, and Pat is the operator.
$1945 John Deere H, owned and operated by Keith Mitchell of Warsaw, Iowa.
$1933 Farm F12, owned by Tammy Dingman, a good little gal from Burlington, Iowa. It says Tammy's driving, but I know it's not Tammy.
A 1910 30 horsepower Huber, owned by Leroy McCoy, Colchester, Illinois, operated by Kevin Hamley, Charlie Lane, and Don Squeaky Hardin of Donaldson.
1943 Case SC, owned by Sharon Whigham of Burlington, Iowa, operator 10. That's not right. You don't look like a Tim.
$1957 John Deere 620, owned by Jeff Varga from Riverside, Iowa, and Jeff is the operator.
356, and then...
And 1941 Formula H, owned and operated by Roxanne Little of Riverside, Iowa.
Here's a 20 horsepower Harrison Jumbo, owned by Leroy McCoy of Colchester, operated by Bob Jacoby of someplace up in there.
1950 John Deere Model B, owned by Matthew Dean from Burlington, Iowa. Matthew is the operator.
358 next. 369 it looks like. Yep.
1951 John Deere A, owned and operated by Matthew Dean of Burlington, Iowa.
Jeff's the operator. That's Jeff Basin is the operator. So I'm Dean. I'm a BAC. 69. Go ahead, BC.
1920 20 horsepower Advanced Rumbly, owned by John Beer family of Palmyra, Missouri, operated by John and Brad Beer, restored by same.
1948 Case VAC, owned by Dean Gable, Owen, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Dean's the operator.
Half-scale Case, owned by Ron Craigs of Kilbourne, Illinois, operated by Ike and Mike Rawson of someplace else.
1945 Farno H, owned by Dean Crater of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
Cody? I couldn't hear it. 379. Yep. Yep.
1937 25 horsepower Kitten, owned by Michelle McCool of Colchester, Illinois, operated by Michelle, assisted by Aaron Bixley.
1956 Case 300 in front, owned by Kenny Buckert, Hamilton, Illinois, and Buckert's Farms. Jared is the operator, assisted by his lawyer.
1963 John Deere 2010 Highcrop, owned by the Barker Farms of Russell, Illinois. Eric is the operator.
2 is the next one. Nope.
382 don't have a card on it. Nice little B. John, International. So
1941 Farmer Lamb, owned and operated by Mike Ellers of Scotch Grove, Iowa.
$1952 Farm Oil Super C, owned by Tyler Weatherchurch from Davenport, Iowa. Tyler is the operator.
380.
Got a couple of passengers there on the back, I see.
A 1905 16 tandem compound Russell, owned by Jeff and Peggy Ballard of Little Rock, Illinois, operated by Jeff, restored by family and friends.
Jump right up there, Jeff.
$1951 Farmer Lamb, owned and operated by Don Workmanshurst of Davenport, Iowa.
1933 Farm Oil F30, owned by Dustin Hines of Anamosa, Iowa, and Dustin is the operator. I believe one went to sleep there.
$1915 65 horsepower case, owned by Alan and Melinda Husinga of Mount Pleasant, operated by Aaron Williamson, assisted by Bob Nesselrode.
1955 Farmer 400, owned by Judy Himes of Anamosa, Iowa.
1951 Case DC, owned by Kelly Hoster from Charlotte, Iowa, and Keith and Annette is operating it very slowly.
This is a 1988 half-scale 65 case, owned by Alan and Melinda Husinga of Mount Pleasant, operated by Grant Goody and James Kinney, and Harrison Nero.
1947 John Deere AR, owned and operated by Paula Dole of LeClaire, Iowa.
1935 Huber HK, owned by Ann Pelley, a good friend from Wheatland, Iowa. Ann's doing the operating and her husband's just sitting there taking a nice cruise.
Run across a Northwest Thresher made in Minnesota, and that thing he's pulling, he just got done with that here about 2 months ago. He's been working on it for a number of years. Old Thrashers owned it, and we just didn't have the time to fix it or the money, and so he took it home, and that's what he came back with. Not too bad.
1964 John Deere 3020, owned by Ken and Marlene Perkins of Bennett, Iowa. Marlene is the operator, and Ken, he's sitting on the fender.
1905 Kelly Springfield Road Roller, owned by Dave Bruce and Russell Hurt, of Centennial, Colorado, and Mount Pleasant, respectively, operated by Russell and Dave, restored by Huffy Ironworks.
This John Deere Model H, operated by Kathy Clark, and Kathy's the owner in Durant, Iowa.
1952 Massey Harris 44, owned and operated by Tyler Lamont of Wilton, Iowa.
1950 Massey Harris 44 diesel, owned by Herbert Lamack from Wilton, Iowa, and Herbert is the operator.
1946 Massey Harris 102, owned and operated by Glenda Dobbins of Durant, Iowa.
1938 John Deere L, owned by Shelby Bride of Tucson, Arizona, and Blair Buffington is assistant.
A 1913 110 horsepower case owned by Old Thrashers, operated by Nick Foster of Jefferson, Iowa, Bob Stevens, and Eric Douglas.
1953 Massey Harris 55 LP, owned and operated by Howard Dobbins of Durant, Iowa.
1946 Massey Harris 101 Junior, our good friend Timmy and Connie Pace from Muscatine, Iowa. Timmy's the operator.
427, no card on the next two.
No card on this little nice looking Minneapolis Moline Z.
We had an M&M dealer down there in Hamilton said the M&M stood for putting money in the bank.
1920 1850 Huber, owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids, operated by Allison Brooks and Dennis Brooks, and restored by the Coonrod family with Allen on the back.
This one here is a homemade one. He just put that together in Model A parts. And
432.
1955 AC WD-45, owned and operated by Paul Martin of Marion, Iowa.
A 1917 case 36 horsepower steamroller, owned by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids, owned by the Coonrod family, and Kenny was a big operator. He's the one who helped set all this stage up.
1938 case Model R, operated by Dorothy Martin from Marion, Iowa, and Dorothy and Paul's the owners.
The 1940 case DC, owned and operated by Paul Martin of Marion, Iowa.
Don't have one. This here is the D case. It's just wide front end, and the other than that is just the DC. We don't have the card on it.
All it needs. 1923 Advanced Rumble Universal, owned by Dwayne Coonrod of Cedar Rapids, operated by Sean, assisted by Dwayne. And John Johnson's wife's on the back, so I don't understand this.
No card on the nice looking little case 350.
403. John Deere. You had this one, didn't you? 1935 John Deere Model B, owned by Jimmy Bride from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Matt Cool is the operator.
The 1919 20 horsepower Advanced Rumbly, owned by John Johnson of Springville, Iowa, operated by John and Choo Choo.
442.
No number on this next case. It's a 830, white front. Oh, it's an 8-volt. Steve Martin, Springfield, Iowa. Springville.
1915, the 40 horsepower case, owned by Andrew Delaney of Cedar Rapids, operated by Tom Delaney, father, assisted by Cole Berkey, and Tom's on the back, and Andrew's writing on the back. And it's restored by Johnny Johnson of Springville.
1949 Case SC, owned by Ken Klopp from Danville, Iowa, and Ken is the operator. Spent a lot of days with two-wheel cultivator like that, cultivating corn.
1924 25 horsepower Russell, owned by John Galls, Chicago, Illinois, operated by Whitey and Junior and Mrs. Whitey.
1951 Thermal H, owned by John Butler, Marion, Iowa. John is the operator. He's being pushed by a little 1935 F12.
A 1909 44 horsepower case, owned by the Engelbritson family of Danville, Indiana, operated by Dan Thornton.
1947 Thermal Cab, owned by Don Butler from Marion, Iowa, and Don and John is the operators or owners.
1959 ACWD 45, owned and operated by Kendall Roulette of Libertyville, Iowa.
Go ahead, DC.
$1914 2060 double simple Gar Scott, owned by Russell Lamp of Letts, Iowa, operated by Russell and Ken Tripp. Restored by Russell.
1942 Thermal H, owned by Todd Woodburn from Libertyville, Iowa. Todd is the operator.
1952 Alice Chalmers WD, owned and operated by Scott Roulette of Libertyville, Iowa.
1919 2175 at A.D. Baker, owned by Scott Riley of Marion, Iowa, assisted by Mary Bixlow of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. He's pulling an Avery rally wagon, owned and restored by Scott Riley.
450. Yeah.
Oh, the John Deere A. 1934 John Deere A, owned by Lyle Conrad of Olds, Iowa, and Lyle's the operator.
No card on the Thermal.
456. Yep. And 457. 457.
No card on the Thermal H.
1892 12 horsepower Advance. This was originally a straw burner. It's owned by Wade and Allen Smith of Grand Mound, Iowa, operated by Allen, restored by Allen and Wade.
1946 Thermal B, owned by Dale Taylor of Bloomfield, Iowa, and Dale's the operator.
1936 John Deere A, owned and operated by Roger Shaver of Birmingham, Iowa.
1953 Thermal Super W6, owned by David Wingard from Drakesville, Iowa, and David is the operator.
A 1923 75 horsepower case, owned by Old Tractors, of course, Mount Pleasant, operated by Jack Siddell and Andy Retro.
1946 Thermal C, owned by Audrey Wigan of Drakesville, Iowa.
1938 John Deere Model B, owned by Dennis Phillips of Ollie, Iowa. Dennis is the operator.
474.
1948 John Deere A, owned and operated by Hillary Landman of Fremont, Iowa.
1916 the Thermal Ferguson T30, owned by Marvin Johnson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Marvin's the operator.
A 1916 40 horsepower case, owned by Roland Van Valk Capella, operated by Roland, restored by the Van Valk family.
No card on the little Ford 8N. Got a young operator there, though.
No card on that one either. No card on I know.
1917 50 horsepower case, owned by Susan and Brian Van Valk Capella, operated by Brian Peter Swank, restored by the Van Valk family. This John Deere 70 coming here in front of us is owned by Dan Holstein from Wapello, Iowa, 70 diesel.
1953 Alice. It's a 1949 Ford 8N. They call it Dad's Tractor. Anita Bedniger.
1950 John Deere Model A, and owned by Mary Griffiths of Libertyville, Iowa, and Mary's the operator.
Got to build a bigger fire. 1917 16-horse double-simple Reeves, owned by the J.P. Gallagher family, Piper City, Illinois, operated by John III and Courtney Gallagher.
1950 Ford 8N, owned and operated by Wayne Mill of Quincy, Illinois.
1943 John Deere Model B, owned by Tom Busser of Letts, Iowa, and Tom is the operator.
1886 12-horsepower case, owned by Tom Sater of Mount Pleasant, operated by Brian Wilson of Donaldson and Tanya Harvey of Argyle.
1949 BF Avery V, owned and operated by Gary Duff of Marla, Iowa.
495 is another BF Avery, single front wheel, don't have a card on it.
Next one.
1951 Farmel MD, owned and operated by Charles McComber of Cascade, Iowa.
Okay, DC.
A 1913 20-horsepower return fluid Avery, operated or owned by Jeff and Charlize Ruth of Rogersville, Missouri, operated by Jeff and Everly Harley.
The Farmel 300 here in front, operated by Tammy Burns from Bernard, Iowa, and James is the owner.
1941 John Deere B, owned and operated by Nathan Pepper of Brighton, Iowa.
A 1914 12-horsepower Russell, owned by Jerry Fricky and Sharon Davis, Winfield and Salem respectively, operated by Tracy, David, and John Barry, restored by Bill Perrineau and Brian White.
Hey, either one of them. This John Deere B right in front, we don't have a card on it. I don't think we got a card on them. 508. I'm glad to see these people out here with the umbrellas up. Don't need it now today.
1885 6-horsepower Nickel Shepherd, owned by Sharon Davis of Salem, operated by John Burlington and Tom Masters, restored by Craig Dobbin.
1951 John Deere G, owned by Ed and Charlene Segerman of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Jeremy Lee is the operator from the little two-row planter.
1941 Farmall H, owned by Chris Anderson from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Ed and Charlene Segerman is the owners.
And this last one is a Reeves engine, Nichols Shepherd boiler, mounted on a Mack truck chassis. Warren, when he built this, he saw them racing in Minnesota, so he had to have one. So anyway, there it is. It's operated by Alexis Delaney and Lester Butterfield, and on the front is Dana and Sarah and Sam. And behind it is a Tangley Calliope. It's made in Muscatine, Iowa in 1929. It's also operated by owned and operated by the Coonrod family of Cedar Rapids.
1956 John Deere 420, owned by Ed and Charlene Segerman of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1949 Firm OM, owned by Matt Sanford from Des Moines, Iowa, and Matt is the operator.
$1937 Fairmont F12, owned and operated by John Morrison of Vasco, Illinois.
Well, you lucked out, DC. I think you've got all yours gone already. W30 McCormick Dairy 533 don't have a card on it.
$1951 Ferguson TO20, owned and operated by Ernie Loft of Kirksville, Missouri.
1948 Farmville Cub, owned by John Grimes of Hardin, Iowa, and Bernie is the operator.
1948 Ford 8N, owned and operated by William Gunther of Washington, Iowa.
John Deere A.
On the far side, got a John Deere A. We don't have a card on it.
No card on the little F12, nicely painted.
The Ward's twin row on the far side, owned by the Ward family.
1934 Alice Chalmers WC, owned and operated by Robert Crable of Uniontown.
1944 John Deere Model A, owned by Dean Wilson of Washington, Iowa, and Dean is the operator.
1935 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by D. Norman Beauchard of Wayland, Iowa.
Here's a good old fellow from Wayland, Iowa, 1949 Alice Chalmers WD, owned and operated by a good friend, Norman Bouchard from Wayland, Iowa.
1962 Minneapolis Moline Jetstar, owned and operated by Merle Pasha of Washington, Iowa.
Don't have a 580 there on that little Ford here in front.
In 1955 Alice Chalmers WD-45, owned and operated by Earl Sorter of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1940 John Deere Model L, owned by Carl Wickham from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Carl's the operator on the far side.
In 1949 Alice Chalmers WD, owned and operated by Earl Swaggart of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1957 Alice Chalmers WD-45, owned by Bob Swigart from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Robert is the operator.
In 1950 John Deere A, owned and operated by Robert Swigart of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1956 Alice Chalmers WD-45, owned by Dwight Deers from Fairfield, Iowa, and Dwight is the operator.
98.
1957 ACCA, owned and operated by Porter Laughlin of Dowds, Iowa.
1929 Case Model CC, owned by Curtis Fagg from Waterloo, Iowa. Curtis is the operator.
Farmer Regular, owned and operated by John Arbohaski of Muscatine, Iowa.
1937 John Deere Model A, owned by Carl and Rich McNahee from Delmar, Iowa, and Carl and Richard McNahee is the operator.
1938 John Deere B, owned and operated by Jim McNamee of Delmar, Iowa. Next tractor is a 1920 Farmo. 1939 Farmo F20.
Okay. 1957 Farmall Cub Lowboy, owned by Robert Busser from Nichols, Iowa, and Robert is the driver.
1955 AC WD-45, owned and operated by Mike Buser of Mount Vernon, Iowa.
1958 Alice Chalmers CA, owned by, operated by Brian Busser of Nichols, Iowa, and Brian is the owner.
1949 Alice Chalmers C, owned and operated by Sean Michael of Norway, Iowa.
1938 John Deere Model B, owned by Jerry Mickles from West Branch, Iowa, and Jerry's the operator.
1936 John Deere A, owned and operated by Larry Michael of West Branch, Iowa.
1941 John Deere HM, owned by Fred and Helen Lobb from Coresville, Iowa, and Fred and Helen the owners.
1958 John Deere 520, owned and operated by Jim Michael of Waunakee, Iowa.
It's a John Deere 70 diesel. Don't have a card on it.
1958 International Harvester 650B, owned and operated by Matt Gilland of Albia, Iowa.
1958 John Deere 820, owned by Brian Pennington from Lucas, Iowa, and Pennington family's the owner.
1948 Leader B, owned and operated by Don and Kathy Jones of Keokuk, Iowa.
1948 Alice Chalmers Model C, owned by Bobby Rich of Lockridge, Iowa, and Bobby's the owner.
1935 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by Daniel Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Jim Terrence is the operator.
1935 Alice Chalmers Model U, owned by Jim Terrence from Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Danny Peterson, the operator.
1934 Massey Harris 1220, owned by Daniel Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Alex Peterson is the operator.
1928 Wallace 2030, owned by Danny Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Danny, here he comes. There's Danny coming.
1947 Massey Harris 44-6, owned and operated by Dave Loving of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1956 Massey Harris 555, owned by Jason Loving of New London, Iowa, and Jason is the owner.
1948 Alice Chalmers G, owned by Daniel Peterson of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Jake Terrence is the operator.
1939 John Deere Model B, owned by Wayne Hoyle from Crawfordsville, Iowa, and Wayne's the owner.
No card on the John Deere 60. And no card on the John Deere A.
685.
Is a 1948 BF Avery right here in front, owned by Wendell Schellenberg from Pleasant Hill, Iowa.
1923 Ford T conversion, owned by Dean Yoder of Iowa City, Iowa. Dean is the operator.
1949 Ford 8N modified, operated by Terry Proctor from Unionville. I hope it's Iowa. Terry Proctor is the owner.
1949 Minneapolis Moline U, owned and operated by Anthony Proctor of Unionville, Missouri, Iowa.
1951 Farm OM, right here in front, and Jeff and Jerry Cool from Fairfield, Iowa.
1939 John Deere B, owned by Lloyd Bank of Salem, Iowa, operated by Jim Shellaby, and this tractor was purchased by his grandfather.
1952 Case VAC, owned by Marla Schaefer of Fairfield, Iowa, and Floyd Schaefer is the owner.
1944 Case VAI, owned and operated by Floyd Schaefer of Fairfield, Iowa.
1957 IH 350, owned by Bert Vanderhoof of Donaldson, Iowa, and Bert is the operator or the owner.
1957 John Deere 620, owned by Ronald Bauer of Fairfield, Iowa. Jeanette Bauer is the operator.
1934 Alice Chalmer WC, owned by Ronald Bauer of Fairfield, Iowa, and Ronald is the owner.
1959 John Deere 630, owned and operated by Walter Church of Salem, Iowa.
1952 John Deere Model A, owned by Kenton and Dalton Church of Salem, Iowa, and Walter Church is the owner.
And no parade card on the little John Deere B.
That one.
1958 John Deere 630, owned by Howard Smith of Birmingham, Iowa, and Howard Smith is the owner.
1944 Alice Chalmers C, owned and operated by Howard Chandler of Tana, Iowa.
1950 Farm OH, owned by Gary Sparks of Fairfield, Iowa, and Gary's the owner.
We have no card on the little Ford 8N, but it's Aaron
725.
Sheets from Stockport, Iowa. Sorry, Aaron.
1939 John Deere Model B, owned by Stephen Beckel from Fairfield, Iowa, and Steve is the owner.
1951 John Deere B, owned and operated by Don and Steve Beacle of Fairfield, Iowa.
1941 Ford 9N, owned by Richard Bloomquist from Fairfield, Iowa, and Richard is the owner.
1930 Harper 1836, owned and operated by David Van Sant of Harvey, Iowa.
1945 John Deere BR, owned by Ron Van Sant from Oskaloosa, Iowa. Ron is the owner.
1926 Wallace 2030, owned and operated by Steve Van Sant of Knoxville, Iowa.
1929 John Deere Model D, owned by Gerald Van Sant of Tracy, Iowa. Gerald is the owner.
Wait a minute. That's not too long.
DCK.
1953 Case DC, owned and operated by Larry Harwood of Delta, Iowa.
1947 Massey Harris 20, owned by Gail Fisher of Villas, Iowa, and Gail is the owner.
1938 Alice Chalmers WC, owned by Robert and Deb Van Waller of Pleasantville, Iowa. Robert is the operator.
1951 John Deere, owned by Kevin Treppening of Knoxville, Iowa. Kevin is the owner.
1958 Farmville 350, owned and operated by Royal Johnson of West Liberty, Iowa.
1935 John Deere Model D, owned by Mike Jameson from Columbus Junction. Mike Jameson is the owner.
1936 Farmville F20, owned by Larry and Scott Wilmoth of Indianola, Iowa. Larry is the operator.
1942 Farm OH, operated by Linda Wilmoth from Indianola, Iowa. Linda's the owner.
No card on the little ACC.
$19.49 ACG, owned by Metro Teglia from Brighton, Iowa.
$7.90.
Don't have an ID. $7.90 we don't have.
$7.90.
We have no card on the Massey Harris 44.
What about a 91? 1951 Massey Harris 44 on the far side. Dean Van Ness from Danville, Iowa, and Dean is the owner.
No card on John Deere G.
$1961 John Deere 3010 on the far side. It's owned by Nicole Howe from New London, Iowa. Nicole is the operator, not the owner.
No card on little John Deere here.
1941 Farmer H, owned and operated by Dave Fuller from Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
1940 ACC, owned by Brian Howell of New London, Iowa. Lincoln Haynes is the operator.
Don't have an 808, we don't have a card on it.
815.
815. $1953 Alice Chalmers WD 45, owned by Gall Martin of New London, Iowa. Gall is the operator.
No card on the little Farmall B. 1943 Farmall H, owned by Melvin Mulligan of Packard, Iowa. Stetson Spees is the operator.
1939 Farmall A, owned by Dean Farming from Grinnell, Iowa. Dean is the owner.
The 1954 Ferguson T.O., owned by Mulligan Farms Packard. Melvin is the operator.
1954 Ferguson T.O., owned by Milliken Farms of Packwood, Iowa.
1958 Minneapolis Milling Z.A., owned and operated by James Taylor of Fairfield, Iowa.
1948 Ferguson T.O. 20, owned by Galen Herbling from Pleasant Hill, Iowa.
1950 Minneapolis Milling U, owned and operated by James Taylor of Fairfield, Iowa.
1943 John Deere Jim Longberg from Winfield. Jim is the owner.
1953 John Deere 50, owned by Corey Black of Hayfield, Iowa. Corey is the operator with some help.
1954 Case VAC 14 on the far side. Mark Gobrain Fairfield is the owner is Mark.
No card on the little John Deere MT with two-bottom plow.
1952 IH Super A, owned by Lynn Douglas of Edina, Missouri. Lynn is the owner.
1935 McCormick Deering 012, owned by Jack Seward Jr. of Wellman, and it doesn't look like Jack's driving it.
1935 McCormick Deering 012 Orchard, owned by Jim Stewart from Wellman, Iowa, and Jim Stewart is the owner.
1343, Selena Garden Factory. Oh boy.
1970 John Deere 140, owned and operated by Dan Barnhart of Washington, Iowa.
1353.
1948 homemade garden tractor, Matthews Toddler
59.
from Fairfield.
1970 Mallard Mustang, 7
Oh, a nice
horsepower,
little wagon there.
owned by Addison Tagler and driven by Addison of Fairfield, Iowa.
Somebody's having a birthday.
Who's having a birthday? 1 year old. Awesome. Well, happy birthday.
1961 IHC Cub Cadet 70, Owen Baker, Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And Owen is the owner.
1367.
1960 Science and Mechanics Power Pup, owned and operated by Donald Luke of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, assisted by Andrew Hines. Andrew's not with you.
Here's the Oliver Lawn Tractor, Ethan Graber, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Harold Salmons is the owner.
1962 Panzer lawn tractor, owned by Harold Salmons of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Levi Graber is the operator.
76, 77.
77.
Don't have it.
No card.
Here's a little track machine, the John Deere 140. It's what you...
22,
1975 Wheel Horse, owned and operated by Robert Sawyer of Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
The 1977 Alice Chalmers 710,
No card.
owned by Jeremiah Cagney from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Earl's the owner.
No card on the little Minneapolis 108.
1969 Cub Cadet 12912 HV Custom 1086. Mark Ryder from Kilcook, Iowa. He's a good mechanic over there at Kilcook.
This next case is a 1967 case 155, owned by the Buckert Farms of Hamilton, Illinois. Jared and Tori are the operators. This next one's a case 180, owned and operated by Austin Buckert. It's a 1966 model.
You don't know this next one, do you?
Yeah, this my wife Lori on a case 222. Then it's got a one-bottom Brindley plow attached to it. This next John Deere is a 110. It's a patio special. They made these in 4 different colors in the late 60s, early 70s, and Jeremy Buckert's the operator. Then Don Matthews bringing up the last with the Alice Chalmer Homestead, 8 horsepower, pulling a wagon. From Don is from Danville, Iowa.
Well, I think that about takes care of the cavalcade of power here for the first day. It's been a beautiful day, not too hot or cold either one. You'd have to agree that we missed the bullet today because 6 o'clock this morning we just swore it was going to be raining by 8 o'clock, but it all went north of us, we hope. So let's hope it stays that way. And don't forget to come out to the stage show, the Country Gold tonight. They got a nice show. There's 4 people, I believe, in there, and you really get your money's worth tonight. If not, we'll see you tomorrow. I want to thank Dwight Copeland here to my right for taking half of them for a long time, and his lovely wife over at the far side, and my wife over here at the far side, Ruthie, and my boy Alan here, so it's just kind of a family affair, I guess.
And we'd like to thank Mr. Fred Becker here.
We'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same station.